now. There we go. I tonight we're going to look at Jehovah Jireh, which is probably one of the most well-known names of God. And I have this. This is kind of the outline that I preached on when I did this back in 2011, 2012, somewhere around in there. It was right after I came here. So it was a long time ago when we went through this. And after I've been thinking about it all week, I decided I don't really want to preach through this, but I'm going to talk about an illustration to begin with, and then I'm going to let you all tell about the story, okay? Because I think you should know the story, and so I'm going to let you do it. Back in 1988, in the World Series, the Dodgers were playing the Oakland A's. And in Game 1, thanks to Jose Canseco hitting a grand slam, the A's were up 4-3 going into the bottom of the ninth. Dennis Eckersley, who was their ace reliever, was on the mound. He had 45 saves that year, one of the best pitchers there was. First batter hit a pop-up for an out. Second batter struck out. The next batter was a power hitter. So he was very, very careful to that batter and ended up walking him. And then Kirk Gibson walks through the plate. Now, Kirk Gibson had been hurt. He had not played in the last couple of games. I don't remember. He was sick. He had injured his hamstring. He had a stomach virus. He had spent the entire game in the clubhouse, and no one really expected him to play at all during the series. And then all of a sudden, he comes out and hobbles up to the plate. First pitch was a foul ball for strike one. Second pitch, foul ball, strike two. And then another foul, a third ball. There was another ball in through there. Two balls, then another foul, and then a third ball. So count was 3-2, 2 outs, bottom of the ninth. And I remember watching this, and the announcer was talking about Kirk Gibson and how he would have to hit at least what would normally be a double or a triple just to get to first base because he couldn't run. And pitch came, and he hit it, knocked it over right field fence for a home run. And it was a 2-run walk-off home run, so they ended up winning 5-4. But if you remember, as he was coming around third base, he started doing the fist bump like this, if y'all ever remember seeing that at all. But this is kind of the situation that Abraham was in. Bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, full count, and God came through for him. So let's start off talking about Abraham. Who was he? Yeah, where'd he come from? Ur of the Chaldees, which is southwest of Israel. It's I'm not sure what country it's in right now, but it's to the south and west. East. I'm looking at the map going over here. South and east of where Jerusalem is now. What did God tell him to do? To leave. What did God tell him, though? What did God tell him besides leaving? Leave your family. Leave your mother and father and go to a land that I will show you. Did he follow that? No. In fact, his father, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that his father followed him, or went with him at least as far as Haran, and then who else was with him? Nephew Lot, the whole time, right? So he didn't exactly do what God told him to do. And then once he got to this area, God told him that he was going to give all the land as far as he could see, north, south, east, and west, to him and his descendants. That would be their land. And then a famine hit. And what did they do? What did he do? He went to Egypt. And when he got to Egypt, What did he do when he was there? He lied about something, yeah. He lied. Lied about his wife, said Sarah was his sister. Now, she was stepsister, is that the right term? Half-sister, that's it, half-sister. But she was also his wife. And then a little bit later, he was in the land of Elimelech, and I don't remember what nation that was, and he did the same thing, right? It seems like all the time leading up to this event, he was close, but there was always some little hedge from following exactly what God told him to do, right? Came to this point here. He had, by the way, he had 2 sons, right? Who was the first one? Ishmael. And who was Ishmael's mom? Hagar, yeah. That was, yes. Sarah's, thank you. I just went blank. Her servant, slave. And Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham as a wife, and so that she could have a baby, and then Sarah would claim that baby as her own. They did that quite often. And so you had Ishmael born, and then much later you had Isaac. And he was called the son of the promise because God had promised to Abraham, him and his descendants, or this land would be his descendants. And until that point, Ishmael was his descendant, but God also came back later and said, "Yeah, you're going to have a son with Sarah, and that's going to be Isaac. And you're going to name him Isaac, which means laughter." And then what happened? This is where we get into this story. No, before that. Yes. And that's what we're going to look at. That's where the name comes in. So Genesis 22, 1 and 2, if you can find that.
What did you say his name meant, Isaac?
Laughter.
Laughter? Sorry.
I think I skipped some things, Terry, but it's after the request. By the way, the first thing, it says the request is sacrifice. I've read and studied since then, and maybe that should be offer, because it depends on which translation. The NIV just says to sacrifice your son, but I think the better translation is offer him as a sacrifice. Offer your son. Do you find it? Genesis 22, 1 and 2. It's after Roman numeral 1. There we go. Okay. It says, sometime later, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham, here I am." He replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." So first of all, it says that God tested Abraham. The word there, I truly believe that God already knew he was going to pass, okay? It's not like when I would give the test to my students and I would know some of them would not know how to do this, you know. In fact, a few years ago, I had a chemistry test, and I had 8 or 9 students, and I knew 2 of them knew how to do it, and none of the rest of them. And I said, you know, I would really like to give the test, but I don't think y'all are ready. And they said, "Oh, yeah, we can do it." "Are you sure?" "Oh, yeah, we can do it. We can do it." And so I gave it to them, and 7 of them did really, really well in the test. And until I started looking around and figure out they copied. That's why they did really well. And it was very obvious what they did. So anyway, I believe that God already knew that Abraham would pass this test. I think he knows when he tests us, he knows beforehand whether or not we're going to pass. And I think if we just trust in him, we will pass. I mean, we'll come through just fine. And that word test means to qualify through a thorough examination. And I think that's what was going on. In James it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing or the trying of your faith develops perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work so that it may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." And I think God still tests us today, still checks up on us and makes sure that we're, following him and doing what he has called us to do. In Deuteronomy, it talks about God led them in the desert to humble them and to test them. And everything that they experienced during that time was to make sure that they followed God and they learned to follow him in everything. Just things like manna. How did they gather manna? Yeah. Every morning, right? And how much? Enough for that day. And what happened when they tried to keep it to the next day? It spoiled and stunk, except on Friday. Yeah, on Friday they could gather twice as much, and it was fine the next day. All of this because of God. When God sent the snakes and they bit the snake, what did they have to do? Look at the pole. Snake on the pole. Look at that bronze snake, yeah. And you will live. Is there any healing in looking at that bronze snake? No. The faith, that's right. Faith is what healed them. It wasn't, something magical about the serpent. Yeah. Yeah. So, God told him to do this to test him, to check up on him, but like I said, I truly believe he knew Abraham was going to pass it. The second thing, he gives him three commands during this request to offer a sacrifice. And first of all, he says, take your son, your only son, Isaac. Was Isaac his only son? That's right. He had Ishmael too. So why did God say, take your son, your only son?
Why did he say that? Because he was going to be considered the firstborn.
Right. He's the one through which the promise was going to be fulfilled, not Ishmael. It's really interesting, and I don't know whether I've told you all recently, but I know I did years ago when I talked through this. When I was at Putnam City and teaching there, there was a Muslim holiday, and I don't remember which name it was, but one of my Muslim girl students, she wasn't there at school that day. So when she came back the next day, I asked her about it, and she said it was a holiday, and I said, what one? And she told me the name, and I said, what does that celebrate? And she said, well, that was where Father Abraham took Ishmael up and offered him to offer him as a sacrifice, and God intervened, and there was a ram caught in the thicket, and he sacrificed the ram instead of Ishmael.
Wrong person.
Right story, wrong child, right? So, what did Abraham expect to happen? I mean, think about that. Take your son and offer him as a sacrifice.
One of those God will provide.
Yeah,
He didn't question it. He just had faith.
that's right.
Doing what God said.
And in Hebrews it says that Abraham reasoned that if he did offer him as a sacrifice, or if he sacrificed him, that God would have to raise him from the dead, because he knew that Isaac was the son of promise. Now, it doesn't specifically say that in the Old Testament, but I'll get to that in just a minute, where it has to be what he expected. And he says to go to Mount Moriah. Why Mount Moriah? That's right. It's the same, basically same location as where Jerusalem is, where Calvary is, where Golgotha. It's kind of on a hill, and that hill or that mountain area is called Moriah. It could be the very exact spot that Jesus was crucified. I've read a lot of different people that say, it was not exact same spot, but it was in the same region, basically, and the same hilly country. But he was kind of acting out what God was going to be doing thousands of years, or a couple of thousand years later, right? And he says to sacrifice him or offer him as a sacrifice. Was God approving of child sacrifice? No. That's totally against anything that he would ever want. But it is showing Abraham's total commitment. I mean, if you look like we talked about a while ago, you look at his life, when they told him to leave his family and go, well, he went, but he took some family with him. Told him to, trust him, and all through there were things that happened that Abraham was following God, but not perfectly. It reminds me of in the New Testament, Jesus is talking, and I started to do this as a sermon, but I don't think I will. And he tells about two sons, and one of them, the father said, "Go out and work in the field," and the son said, "No, I'm not, or won't." But then later he changed and went. And then he went to the other son and said, "You go out and work in the field," and the son said yes, but he never went. And he asked the leaders, the Pharisees, which son did the Father's will? And they said, well, the first son, the one that, even though he said, "No, I'm not going to," he went ahead and did it. To me, neither son did what God's will was. God's will was, follow, go, do exactly what you were told to do. And I think that Abraham was more like that first son. He followed, but not completely, up until this point. But he learned every step of the way. He learned, and it to me it just reminds me that even though I don't follow him completely, I'm learning, and hopefully getting closer to doing that every day, and not ever be perfect, but hopefully I'm getting closer and closer as I go. And then Roman numeral 2 is the response, and that was obedience. In verse 3 it says, "Early the next morning Abraham got up, he saddled his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him." He left immediately. Did exactly what God told him to do. He said, "Go to this place," and Abraham got up the next morning, early on the next morning, without hesitation, loaded up, and then went. And I, like I said, I think that was a lot because of all through his life, he was learning and getting more and more like God wanted him to be. I'm going to skip on down here. Hebrews 11. You find it. Hebrews 11. There we go. "By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, 'It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned.' And Abraham reasoned," and this is what I was saying earlier, "that God could raise him from the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead." Had there been anybody rise from the dead before this in the Bible? Any stories that somebody rose from the dead? No, as far as I know, that had never happened. And yet Abraham figured God could do it. He could do something that had never been done. And then the next thing I put that it had preparation. He took with a knife. He took the fire, he took the wood, and they went. It took servants to help him get there, but then we're going to get to a point where he goes on by himself. So the resolve, Roman numeral 3, this is showing Abraham's total commitment. It says, on the third day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place in the distance, and he said to his servants, stay here with the donkeys while I and the boy go over there. We'll worship, and then we will come back to you. So I put isolation here because he separates from the servants, just he and Isaac. And God does not speak to him again until he's about to kill Isaac. So from that point on, he was resolved to do whatever God told him to do, right? And he followed God. One of the questions I had from this was, have you ever promised to pray for somebody and you go and pray one time or maybe twice, and then you forget about it and you go weeks, and then you still praying for me? Oh, yeah. We need to be consistent in things like that. We need to, whatever God has called us to do, we need to do it and keep doing it until he tells us to do something else. And sometimes that's not easy. Well, most of the time that's not easy, because I think that once you start doing what God's will is, that you're going to run into a lot of difficulties, a lot of interruptions. God's going to allow different things just to see if you are truly following him and doing what he's called us to do. So he isolated God. He was isolated from the servants, and God hadn't spoken to him for that time. He's separated because why do you think God had him separate from the servants? Could be. Right? A little more, even more than that. What do you think the servants would have done if he tied up Isaac and put Isaac on the altar and took a knife to start to kill him? What would the servants would have done? Yeah, they would have stopped him, right? And I think God knew that. And I think a lot of times we maybe even look, or at least hope, that somebody will come along and talk us out of doing whatever it is that God's called us to do. And sometimes we look for that, and we wait and we postpone just so maybe somebody may, did I really understand this right? And try to let other people dissuade us from doing what God has called us to do. And what was the last thing he told the servants? Can you go back up to that, wherever that was?
You stay here and we'll come back later.
That's right. We will come back. He says, I'll find it in here. I'll find the verse. Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. That's why I said it doesn't specifically say that Abraham believed that God would raise him from the dead, but right there it says, we're going to go and we're going to come back. And he knew he was going to sacrifice his son, so he knew something would have to happen for them to come back. He was showing his faith. And then Roman numeral 4 is the reliance. Abraham took the wood. This is in verses 6 through 8. Took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. And as the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here. Isaac said, "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. Now, Abraham had faith. We know that God would raise him from the dead, but Isaac had to have a lot of faith too. Because here his dad said, "Okay, God's going to provide a sacrifice." He's like, "Okay, no problem. Let's go." And then when they get there, by the way, yeah, I'll come back to that. God did provide the lamb, right? And like I said earlier, probably in the same location where Jesus was crucified. And what name did Abraham call God? What name did Abraham call God? Jehovah Jireh, which means God will provide. Yeah, God my provider. That's right. And so when it came down to it, this I called the reckoning, but the attempt when it came there, verse 9, it says, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there, arranged the wood on it, and then he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Again, Isaac had to really trust his dad and trust God. Isaac knew that he also knew that he was the child of promise. I imagine they told Isaac over and over as he was growing up how miraculous the birth was and how old his mom was when she gave birth to him, and the promises. That's right, that God had promised it, and that God. Well, I believe it was Jesus appeared to him right before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and said, or maybe it's after that, but he said, "This time next year you're going to have a son. Sarah is going to have a son," and all of that. He had to trust and believe in all of that. But it's still, I kind of wonder sometimes what he was thinking. Especially, they tied him up and laid him there, and his dad has a knife getting ready to plunge it into him. My dad, he might have. I probably would have. My dad, he used to, he was a pastor, and some sermon, and I've looked it up before, but because I've got all of his sermons. But there's one sermon that, and I don't think it was on this, I think it was on something else, but he had a starter pistol. And he was my brother before me, so I already knew what was going to happen. But in the middle of his message, he called me from the back, because typical youth, I was sitting on the very back row. And I walked up, and he would be standing like right in here, and I got to just about that point, and he'd take that starter pistol out and shoot it, but he'd never aim it at me. I mean, most of the time it was like shooting to the side, but it was loud. I mean, it sounded like any gun going off. And then I would grab myself and fall down, and I'd lay there for just a few seconds, and then I'd get up, and usually I was shaking all over because I didn't like doing things like that. It embarrassed me having everybody looking at me, And then I'd just sit on the front pew the rest of the service. And he would talk about how God sacrificed his son. And then he would say, I can't even aim it at my son, but God did. He allowed his son to be sacrificed. So of course I knew I wasn't going to be hurt, but it's still, with all that attention on me, it kind of took some out of me just to know I had to walk up there and do it. And then you have the relief. In verses 11 to 14, it says, the angel of the Lord called out to him from the heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here am I, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked, and there was a thicket. He saw a ram caught by its horns, and he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide, or Jehovah Jireh. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. When did the ram get caught in the thicket? You ever thought about that? I've been thinking about that this week. I don't know, it just popped in my mind. But an animal, if it gets caught in a thicket, what's it going to do? It's going to struggle to get out of there, right? Until it's worn out where it can't. So this had to have happened quite a ways before Abraham got there, or it would have already been making a lot of noise and Abraham would have seen it, right? Yeah. And it's just one of those things that hit me that God knew ahead of time, like he does everything. And he provided this before Abraham even got there. And he does the same thing for us. I've heard story after story about things that resemble this. We had some friends that were missionaries I think they were in someplace in Africa, and they had a little girl that was sick. It wasn't them, it was their parents or somebody like that. Little girl that was sick, and another little girl was praying for her and said something like, please bring her a doll so that the doll can comfort her. And that day, they got a package from America, opened it up, and inside it was a doll. That package left America 3 months before. So God knew 3 months ahead of time this little girl was going to need a doll, and he put some people on their heart to send it, and they sent it. In the Bible, all kinds of stories like that. The Ethiopian eunuch is a great example. He's driving along in a chariot in the desert, and all of a sudden, Philip appears. Now, we don't know whether it was that he was transported there or what, but he appears, and he goes and talks to him, and gets up in the chariot, and they're riding along, and he explains everything, explains about salvation, and then the Ethiopian eunuch looks, and we're in the desert, right? And he looks over, and there's water in the desert. And he said, well, what's keeping me from being baptized? And Philip says, nothing, as long as you believe, we can go do that. God planned everything so precisely. It's just, it reminds us, we talked about already God who sees. I just went blank on which one it is. It's Hagar. El Roi, R-O-I, the God who sees. And he not only sees, but he provides. And he has things ready for us when we need it. So last thing on here is the blessing. And it says in verse 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And then Abraham returned to his servants, and then they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So, in your life, there may come a time, maybe that's going on right now, where God has brought you to the plate, and it's the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs, and you have 2 strikes. Remember, no matter how bleak it might look, God will provide. Okay? Anything else you would like to add? I know you, like I said, this was a story that I never knew. Uh-huh. Yes, that's right. Yep.
To me, the life of Abraham is a picture of our growth in faith.
Right.
His life, each experience, and
Right.
And for every problem that we face and we overcome with faith in God, our faith gets stronger.
Yep, that's good picture. It's like our Christian life. Every step of the way we get closer and trust Him more, and yeah, His life is a perfect picture of what our lives should be, right? As far as growing and becoming more dependent upon God and trusting Him better and growing in our faith. Remember, faith is a verb. It's something you do. It's not something you know. It's something that you do. Okay? Anything else? All right. Well, let's stand and sing our dismissal chorus. And
Put that thing over his head and
Jesus loves
me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to Him belong. They are weak, but He is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.